Thank you, Mr. Speaker, honorable members. This is our final day, and I've listened to the different presenters on the opposition side. They have said the budget is clueless, it is visionless, and other such comments. And I'm really not surprised, because you were clueless and visionless when you were in government, and nothing has changed since you become the opposition. You have a budget here, a document that is simple, uncomplicated, no quotations from the Bible, because we're a secular state, unlike previous budgets. But this budget explains very simply a couple of principles upon which the PPPC government is based on. First of all, that we have to take emergency efforts and provide programs and funding to address the COVID-19 pandemic that is in our country. We're doing exactly what countries all across the world are doing. No different. The unfortunate thing is that when the first case was discovered on March the 11th, many countries, our Caribbean brothers and sisters, and the governments there, brought in what was called by April, May, comprehensive approaches to deal with the COVID. And that include health interventions, interventions to prevent the spread of disease by measures such as curfews, etc., and also relief to the people. Every country in the region had, except us. Barbados had it, Jamaica had it, some gave assistance to the frontline workers. We are now doing it. Almost 7 months after the first case was discovered in Guyana. The other aspect of the budget is to do with turning our country back onto a positive path. Between 2015 and 2020, our country got derailed. We came off the tracks. And I know my friends on the other side don't want to hear that. But it is true. And yet you've come to this house with a holier-than-thou approach. My mother would say that it seems if butter could melt in your mouth. Holier-than-thou, really? Talking to us about discrimination? Talking to us about governance? Talking to us about constitutional rule? Really? Really? Your government, when you were in government, had the highest offenses of the Constitution of Guyana than any other regime in this country. You even beat Burnham. You even put Burnham to shame. And you come and talk to us about constitutional rule? And I'll give you some examples, because I know you want proof, and we have the proof. For example, there are many, but we had to restore the Constitution, rule of law, and democracy in this country. These statements you've made in this House don't help you. Don't help you as a political opposition. Your credibility has been destroyed over the last 5 years, and more so in the last 5 months. All this, as you would say, pomposity, does not convince anybody, because people have gone through the last 5 years of increased poverty, of a slowdown in the economy, and worse yet, in the last 5 months, an outright effort for 5 straight months, not a one-off, 5 straight months, to derail the elections and the will of the people of this country. And you come here with holier-than-thou? Really? Who believes you outside there? Maybe only you believe yourselves. And maybe that's why you are where you are. Because the rule that the legacy you've left this country is one of a government that was inaccessible, invisible, that you didn't go down and talk to the people. And I could name village after village after village where people are saying, no minister come here for 5 years. No minister come here for 3 years. This is unacceptable, and that's why you are where you are. And that's why this is an opportunity for you as opposition, as we had to when we were in opposition. Review the way in which we operate and do better. And I call on you to give some thought to that. The last 5 months, but it's more than 5 months, as you all know. Because from the last budget that was brought in December 2018 to now, it's almost 2 years. November is when we start in 2018 discussing the 2019 budget. And yet, you refused to obey the CCJ. I went to other places, which are quite credible, I must assure you. CCJ, I don't have to justify my qualifications to anybody. I've been 40-odd years in this country as a politician. I don't need to justify nobody. And certainly not to you, Mr. Duncan. Certainly not to you. So, Mr. Speaker, the Constitution, the constitutional breaches. Let me just give you an example. Because the CCJ ordered you. The CCJ ordered you in 2019, July the 12th. This was the orders of the Caribbean Court of Justice. They ordered you to hold elections in accordance with the Constitution and to also remember that you're a caretaker government, you're an interim government. And they said there's a restraint on your legal authority and power. You obeyed nothing. Elections were not listed instead of September. It should have been held March, then it was September, until March 2020. But Mr. Speaker, let me just remind my friends on the other side, a lot of new members, and I hope that the new members will use the opportunity to not be led through the nose with a ring, but to be able to read and understand what has happened in this country. Mr. Speaker, this former government, through AFC, appointed 2 persons as technocrat ministers that were on the candidate list. This matter was taken to the court, and the court ruled that 2 ministers, Mr. Skeet Scott and Mr. Winston Felix, unlawfully occupied seats in Parliament in contraventions of Article 60, 1033, 105, 162, as defined by Article 232. And you know what? They continued as ministers until August the 2nd, receiving their pay and benefits, and security, and driver, and cars. So not only did they flaunt the Constitution, they flaunted the courts. Then we had the revocation of the leases of the farmers of the MMA. The court ruled that this was unconstitutionally null and void. The Caribbean Court, as I said, ruled that you had to restrain yourself and to hold elections in consonance with the Constitution. The Caribbean Court of Justice ordered the government of Guyana in 2016 to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to DIPCON. It did not. In contrast to what it did with Rhodesia, where it paid $16 million on a claim without any negotiations for debt repayment when they owed Guyana millions of dollars in taxes. We can continue with the fact that they paid BK International $5.3 billion for a project that they never finished on and paid them full price. The use, we have again and again the Durban Park and the Homestretch Development Inc., where over $1.4 billion was spent, and was still being spent up to 2020, and then where the head of that special purpose company became the head of parks under the Department of Environment, and was receiving very handsome salary. And you see the national park and you see the condition of the park. I don't know what he was doing all those years. We have them taking 6,000 solar panels for the interior and putting it on office of the president. We have over and over again. But let's go to the constitutional bodies, which you did. The Public Service Commission. You talk to us here and you preach to us here about discrimination and independence of the constitutional bodies. But in 2016, Minister Simona Brooms directed the Public Service Commission to cease all interviews and meetings until further notice. The court was approached and the court ruled this was unconstitutional and unlawful. The President moved the chairman of the Public Service Commission a constitutional post holder. The court ruled that this was unconstitutional. He then appointed Mr. Yard in his place, again in breach of the constitutional requirements of appointing the Public Service Commission. The Police Service Commission. The Police Service Commission in 2017. The President, through the Minister of the Presidency, Mr. Harman, I don't see him here yet, I guess he's writing his speech, directed the Police Service Commission to halt all police promotions until further directed. And while the Police Service Commission was expired, the President announced a revamping of the Guyana Police Force and appointments to the leadership of the police without the imprimatur of the Police Service Commission. This matter, too, was taken to the court. The court found that the letter sent by Minister of State Joseph Harman to the Police Service Commission, directing it to withhold work on the annual police promotions, was in flagrant disregard of the Constitution and was unlawful, null, void, and of no effect. The court went on to say this was a blatant disregard of Article 226 of the Constitution, which insulates the Police Service Commission from influence and direction from any person or authority, especially political directions. The Judicial Service, my friend here, will deal with that in terms of the neglect. You've gone through that for 2 years, they're not appointed. Then we have, of course, the biggie one, the Guyana Elections Commission, and the appointment of the former chairman of GCOM in violation of the Constitution. The unilateral appointment of the chairman. And therefore the Caribbean Court of Justice again stated in June the 18th, 2019, the court ruled, quote, "We have no choice but to conclude that the process that was followed in the appointment of Justice Patterson was flawed and in breach of Article 161(2). So don't come and preach us about holier than thou. But let's go on. We are dealing with restoring democracy and also turning our country, turning Guyana around to be able to move forward, because you reverse so many things. We spoke in 2016 when the taxes came out in February 2016. We warned you then that the taxes you were bringing would have a dilatory effect on the Guyanese people. You laughed and you went ahead. And we promised then in that budget speech of 2016 that when we got into office, we would remove those taxes. And in this budget speech, we have kept our promise to the people in 2016, 2017, 18, 19, and 20. And so we have to be able to stimulate the economy. We have to be able to stimulate the economy. I know that you're saying that the purchasing power, let's go back to what those taxes did to the Guyanese people. You see the philosophical difference between us? Some people like to say that it's an ethnic issue. It's not ethnic. There is a philosophical difference between us on both sides of the house. A major philosophical difference. And let me explain. And that is that your approach to development as shown by the 5 years in government, has been one of taxation and monoculture. Our philosophical approach is pro-poor, pro-growth, balancing the two, and being able to create a diversification of the economy, a diversification of the skills and things that are needed in our country, and an inclusive approach to how we run our country. And I'll say that we're in line. Your thing was taxes. Taxes, taxes, taxes. And why do I say you're a monoculture? Why did I say we're not doing things of diversification? Please excuse me, my mask is really irritating me, beg pardon. But the issue of monoculture, you took over with an economy that was in good condition. You took over with an economy that had over $780 million US dollars in our foreign currency reserves. You took over a country where sugar, rice, bauxite, gold, diamonds, timber, fisheries was doing well. What did you do? You closed down estates. You cut off that revenue stream of over 16 to 20 million US dollars that was coming in for the revenue. You brought taxes in that hurt the miners, the businessmen, the manufacturers, the taxi men, the minibus drivers, the vendors. And then you're surprised the economy started to have problems? You removed the revenue base of this country. And you gave it to what? You gave it to oil and gas. So we became, in 4 years, a country where we can say we're more dependent on oil and gas than any of the other sectors in this country. And that's your pride and joy, because you gave it away in the agreement of 2016, which you kept hidden for a year, including the signature bonus. You are so occupied with secrecy and clandestinity that you hid from the Guyanese people that you actually gave away a lot of our patrimony for a small amount of money. But let's go back to the taxes and why this budget has to and had to change the taxes that are brought on our people. The VAT in 2017, you know what it cost the Guyanese people in all the taxes you brought in? It cost $5.2 billion in disposable income. $5.2 billion you took out of Guyanese people's pockets. You then, by us removing the imposition on VAT on zero-rated items, new fees and licenses imposed in 2016 and 2017 budgets, we are in fact returning in excess of $5.2 billion in disposable to Guyanese people, which is approximately $31,200 for every household. By removing VAT on data, we're returning $1.3 billion to the pockets of average Guyanese annually. We have also we've removed another $69 million in terms of reducing the cost of licensing and permits annually. This $469 million will return to the pockets of Guyanese people. By removing the VAT on water and electricity, it will return $2.6 billion to Guyanese annually. And between October and December alone, it will return $660 million to the Guyanese people. That will increase their purchasing power, put money in their hands. By restoring the zero-rated VAT for capital equipment in mining, which is a critical area, $1.3 billion will be returned to the miners annually. And so, Mr. Speaker, that's the difference between us philosophically. You believe in taking away from the people, and we believe in giving the people. There's a fundamental philosophical difference between us. It's as simple as that. Let me cut out all the fancy thing in economics. What the difference is, y'all like tech and we like give. Mr. Speaker, we have to stimulate the economy. And these measures that are brought in these last few months, you know, If you broke up the place, you think you'll fix in 6 weeks. But Mr. Speaker, the issue of, I was listening this morning with the Prime Minister to a UN forum, a virtual forum on sustainable development goals. And it made me remember that we had asked in Parliament, when you were in government, what were you doing with the sustainable development goals? Apparently you did do something, but the public never knew it, nor did the opposition. So the issue of what does Guterres, the Secretary General, say this morning that is so pertinent to the debate going on here today. Guterres talks about the challenges of implementing the 17 sustainable goals. The challenges, particularly in COVID, and the fact that there's been greater reversals in many countries because of COVID. But three important things the gentleman talks about. One is that the political will is needed for inclusive governance. Number two, and you knew this when the goals were brought out years ago, that you needed to have transformative changes, and these were possible, to change the way in which the world deals with those inequalities and gaps and disparities between the rich and the poor. And thirdly, the issue of climate resilience and preserving the climate, preserving our planet, and efforts of using alternative means of being able to have development. This budget actually is about that. This budget talks about, and let me find the page for you, because I suspect that none of you really read the budget. I know the PNC well. I've been around you guys since 1977. And the attitude is that if you didn't write by someone you like, you don't read it. That's your attitude. And that has been your failure all the time. A refusal to look at something even when you don't agree with it. This document on page, let me find it for you, page 60, makes it very clear that the low carbon development strategy will be our developmental national development agenda. So when you say it's visionless, yeah, read the document, you're just talking fluff. You're just blowing wind in the air all the time. You refused to come out of this cocoon, this shell that you keep keeping in. Page 60 says, we will reinstate the LCDS to help achieve prosperity for our people by deploying earnings from forest climate services to diversify the economy and create more jobs and opportunities using a non-carbon intensive pathway. The LCDS will broaden to include wider environment services, including integrated water resources management and climate resistance. It will see the strengthening of the EPA Act and the National System of Protected Areas. So, Mr. Speaker, the LCDS brought in as revenue for us. This was using carbon trading, a new area of diversification in our economy. This wasn't a loan. We weren't getting into debt. We were merely using the wonderful forests we have and our beautiful environment to be able to trade on the world market and be able to gain money through carbon services. And we were able to get $245 million US as a result of that. We're just maintaining our forest management. You didn't like it, you brought in green strategy, development strategy. Nobody really knows what the green strategy development is. We do know that you painted buildings green, and I will say as an aside, the State House will be restored to its traditional historical colors of white walls and the forest green edges.
Not Dr. Green.
Not Dr. Green.
Not Dr. Green.
So, Mr. Speaker, we have a serious philosophical difference of how we address things. When you got into government, when you got into office, there was an issue to do with the hiring issues. And so we have a situation where that you came in and we had about 42,000 employees in the public service under the Ministry of Health payroll. By the time you left office, it was $69 billion. And that you created a bloated bureaucracy. So that in 2014, 2015, as I said, $44.8 billion was spent on employment costs. In 2019, it went up to $69.3 billion. The numbers of the public service increased from 41,441 to 51,020. You are bloating. You had a bloated bureaucracy. And unfortunately, instead of bringing people back from the diaspora who are highly qualified or using highly qualified people, what did you do? This bloating, by the way, deals with, this comes after, these figures come after what you did when you fired 1,972 community service officers in the interior. And you know what you did when you did that? You withdrew $700 million from the Indian communities by firing those 1,972 workers. Why? Because the bill was about $60 million a month they were paid, multiply that by 12. I know you're not, Afternoon has never been good at maths, but anyway, I'm sure you can figure that out. So $700 million per annum was removed from those villages. You impoverished communities, knowingly, wittingly. You then fired 7,000 sugar workers, knowingly, wittingly, and offered nothing in response. You fired in the public service. I hear some people talking about discrimination. And I just cannot believe that you even dare want to use that word. Because you fired over 2,000 to 3,000 people in the public sector. Just because maybe their ethnic complexion you didn't like, or that you thought because of their ethnic complexion they were politically aligned. The issue, though, is that your numbers went up even though you fired about 7,000 people from the public service. And yet your numbers went up. And so when you talk about discrimination and some people lost their jobs, social cohesion, lovely thought, lovely things. But what were they doing? Social cohesion unit was made up of 11 people many of them were regional social cohesion officers who, for the last months until August, were in the counting at the same building representing the APNEOFC. So who was doing public service work? I take over governance. I left governance in 2015 with a database and files that anybody coming in could continue the work that we were doing with human rights and constitution and treaty reporting. And all the parliament files are gone. Yeah, you brought in high-powered people at $650,000 a month plus benefits. Not one file can be found of what was going on in the last 4 years in governance. Nothing. You have social cohesion where there's not one record to show what was the social cohesion department really doing. What were they really doing? I don't even think you know what social cohesion is. The way you talk, you couldn't know about social cohesion. You couldn't understand social cohesion based on how you spoke in this parliament. Mr. Speaker, the politicizing of the public service, and made it into, let me tell you something, maybe these young people, and this I don't know, the Office of the President, formerly known as Ministry of the Presidency, had a political department. And the political department would receive applications or pass through who are UPNO activists. And that would be the screening. So to know these were good boys, good girls, they would be approved by the political department, signed by Mr. McWilford on the advice of Mr. Harman and others, and Mr. Bakker and Mr. Archer. And that would go to the PS to then write a letter to the PSM to employ them. And this was the control freakism that went on. And to make sure that there was no slippage, that no UFO came in that they hadn't screened before. This is the level of freakism that we're finding. Mr. Speaker, they were looking for the Russians, I guess so. But Mr. Speaker, when you listen this morning to the social, when we listen to the UN meeting, what is clear? What became clear for me, even clearer for me, was that what we are talking about in this budget is in consonance with the social development goals and the challenges of country to deal with it. One, it talks about social protection areas, social safety nets, relief for single mothers, taxation reliefs, ability for people to get loans easier. This is all in here. An alternative arrangement to do with climate, which is low carbon development strategy. Assistance to the health workers. This is in here. It talks about using technology to deal with teaching children in the COVID experience. You've heard Minister Priya Manik-Chan talk about information technology. Just that some countries, parts of the country are not connected. So we have to use a combination, as she spoke, and in the Sustainable Development Goals, it talks about that, of having a multi-layered, multifaceted approach to making sure that children have access to education and an equitable access to education. That children who are very poor or children in faraway areas would not be disadvantaged. This is in here too. This is in here too. It talks about housing and having better water and people living in more clean environment. Housing is in here too. Everything to do with the sustainable goals and where we have to go forward is reflected here. So we as a country, we as the government have not departed from what are the goals we have to reach in order to improve the quality of life of our people. And the fact that the quality of life had deteriorated badly. Maybe the Honourable Minister's what's left over there, because some of them didn't come back. Maybe they didn't go out enough to see what people are experiencing. Because when you put all these taxes on miners, work started to slow down. When you put taxes and everything on the manufacturers, including the very weird tax of taxing the export for the manufacturers, made no sense. That is in here being removed as well. Giving the commercial banks and working with the commercial banks to make it easier for our people to get loans so they can borrow. These are all in what is a pro-people, pro-growth combination. And it is applicable to all. Minister,
Honorable Minister, what is applicable now is an extension.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, you may continue.
Thank you, sir. As a developing country, the two challenges we left in 2015 was power generation and telecommunications, connectivity. If we want to move forward as a country, we have to deal with those issues. We were working, and it took us 8 years to get to the point where we did with Amila Falls. In your first budget, you said this was criminal. This was a criminal thing, Amila. You got into government and you threw it away. The Norwegians came on your invitation for an independent analysis of Amila and hydro opportunities in Guyana. The Norwegian company, independent, not government of Norway, advised that the most viable and ready project that could get off the feet in a matter of years was Amila Falls. $80 million we earned from the low carbon development strategy. That's not loan money, that's we money, all of we money. 80 million was put aside for Amila Falls. We're gone now. Is we all do with it? It's not there, we got to start all over again. And you come high and mighty to us and pretend that you're holier than thou? Seriously? So, Mr. Speaker, what is sad, what is really sad, is that we got to start all over again. We got to start all over again. We have to get cheaper electricity for the country and reliable electricity. We want investments. And so the budget talks too about transformative projects. And it says, look, that in this budget, basically, one, we've had no budget for 2020 to comply with the Constitution, and to be able to have funds, we have to be able to put in what we are called an emergency budget. However, you spent half of it already. You spent approximately 160 billion between January and July. I heard my friend, Mr. Trotman, talk about we breached the Constitution, really. And that's coming from a lawyer. That's why I don't trust lawyers. Only my lawyer here, Anil. but the issue is that the Constitution is very clear on this issue, that what you were doing was unauthorizedly spending money above what you're allowed to in the period when there's no budget, there's no appropriation from Parliament. And so you have been having a fun time, haven't you? You've had a good time. You've given away 20-odd pieces of land, all sorts of land all over the place, worth billions of dollars, and you got pittance for it. And so you have again taken money out of the budget. I hear some people talking, whatever that stupid word you're using, fraudulent, whatever the damn thing was. The issue is that you spent the money. Where the money gone? Because when the Auditor General gets involved, then we can get answers. Where the money gone? Because health, the Ministry of Health, I think they're going to lead to some serious issues. The Ministry of Health between 2015 August and 2020 had $151 billion, 2019, sorry. And yet, drugs weren't bought for 2 years? Billions! The highest budget ever, amount of money ever put into health. You beat us on that. We accept. You gave more money to health than we did when we were in office. What do you do with it? What do you do with it? That's why we couldn't understand wherever you went across the country. No drugs, no vaccines, no this, no that. And we're saying, but we just passed in Parliament, they passed 30-odd billion, 40 billion for health. Well, then we got to find out where the money gone, right? We will find out. Promise you that. Mr. Speaker, our focus as a country, I hear a number of people talking about a number of issues. Our focus as a country is one, to defend and preserve democracy all the time. And that's the duty of every citizen, the duty of every political party, the duty of everybody in this room. And the duty of us to be responsible as parliamentarians. I've heard some statements in here that I think people need to think clearly what they say when they're inciting people. We are a multi-ethnic society, a very beautiful tapestry to build our country on, where everybody has a place, whether they vote for APNU AFC, whether they vote for PPP. But unfortunately, when you were in government, if you were PPP, you were like second-class citizens in our own country. And yet you won in 2015 with only 4,526 votes. And that's why you're nervous now, because you believe that we can behave like you. You believe that because you did it, that's our style in the PPP. See, it is not our style. It is not our style. But those who went out on the campaign and in the 5 months and shouted from Coffee Square, the evildoers, and calling on God to smite us down and throw us into the fire, they're a different kettle of fish. They're a different kettle of fish than public servants. And so those who use race in the Facebook and social media have a different role to play, and we will treat them differently, unapologetically, because we have a responsibility to protect our people from violence of all kinds. Mr. Speaker, the issue of, we have said in the budget document that we are working on the diversification of our economy, and therefore in every region they will be looking at what are the investment opportunities, what is needed in every region to open up for investment. Now, opening up for investment is an issue that the APNO traditionally had problems with. Because as soon as you say investment, they have this view it means foreigners. Yes, it could mean foreigners. And why shouldn't we have foreigners here to invest their money in our country, to provide jobs? After all, when you left government, you left 30,000 people unemployed. And so when we say that we're going to build jobs, how do we do that? We have to be able, because everyone can't be employed in the public service. Mr. Grange himself admitted that. After promising the teachers and the soldiers and the public servants in 2015 20% salary increase, which they never implemented, he then said, oh, the government doesn't employ people. You have to go elsewhere. And that's when he talked about plantation. Remember the story? So we have a responsibility to get this economy stimulated back up and running. The taxation is one issue. To remove the impediments and the bureaucratic hurdles that are in our people's way to get business done. Why is it that the miners to fetch the fuel in their own car have to get police clearance to drive the fuel in the interior? That is bureaucratic madness. It's like you have an obsession with red tape. I mean, I know you don't like the color red. I should call it green tape. But anyway, these are issues to free up the place, to free up our economy. And what our responsibility in government is to make sure that we have people who will be treated fairly, that our workers are treated fairly, that micro businesses, as Minister Waldron spoke about the funding available to create micro businesses. Dr. Vinay Prasad has talked about programs for women in business. This is all in line with sustainable development goals. This is all in line with developing our country. We will have a presidential youth council that will be all-inclusive to be able to drive the issue of youth issues. And it's here in the budget. It's right here. Just read it. It's not going to bite you if you read it. It's not going to contaminate you if you read it. Just read it. You know, it's not going to contaminate you. You're not going to get COVID from it. But Mr. Speaker, I encourage, we have the President Irfan Ali said very clearly that when we're elected, when we get into office, we're going to hit the ground running. And in the last 6 weeks, we have attained more in 6 weeks than you guys attained in 5 years, really, with very, very limited resources. The last comment is that I hear, and I'm sure Mr. Harman will repeat it ad nauseum. I'm sure Mr. Harman will raise it ad nauseum. And that is that illegitimate government. And let me just say, in 2015, you got 4,526 votes, more than us. And that we went to election petition. You're not running this show. The man up there, Mr. Speaker, is. When he tells me, done. So, 2015, we had an election petition, which hasn't been heard up to today. You have gone to an election petition. You will have your case heard, I assume, in whatever time it's done. But you can't come here and talk about illegitimate. Your former president agreed to the recount. He agreed to it. And now you're challenging it. You're bad losers. You're poor losers. You're like kids in a playground playing. And because you don't get it right, you throw down your bat and ball and you walk away. You're done. That is your problem. We have won the elections, and with the opposition parties, you have lost by 23 to 24,000 votes. So, take your loss, pull your socks up, and let's get on with building this country for the benefit of all of our people. Thank you very much.